Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Congresswoman Dina Titus. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
It is a pleasure, and you must have had a late night last night. The State of the Union address was last night. President Biden delivered it. First, to kick off the conversation, what is your reaction?
Well, it's very positive. A lot was riding on that speech, and the president came out strong, spoke from the heart, and talked about a lot of the issues that people care about. But he did it by putting it in context with what we've already accomplished and how we build on that for the future.
It's no secret right now, as you know, Congresswoman, that the country is deeply divided. Did you feel that sense of polarization in the room last night?
Oh, there's no question about it. You had some members of the Republican Party wear MAGA hats or Trump T-shirts. They didn't stand for very many things. The Democrats, on the other hand, were very excited. We were up and down throughout the whole speech, but you could tell where that line came down.
Democrats say, like yourself, President Biden sounded strong. He sounded excited, energetic. Republicans are saying, on the other hand, he sounded maybe too angry. Maybe the speech was very partisan. What do you think of those conflicting views? What do you think of that divide?
Well, for the Republicans to say that he was too partisan is really very hypocritical. It's almost to the point of being a joke when they're the ones who are doing the shout outs and wearing the T-shirts, not President Biden. So I think it's important that he cast a contrast between himself and the previous president, Donald Trump, because there is such a dramatic difference. And also, he called the Republicans out. If they don't like being called out, they shouldn't behave that way. Every time you put out an olive branch, they kind of chop the arm off. He mentioned how they're all in their districts taking credit for projects that were funded in bills that they voted against.
I am curious. He touched on a lot of issues last night in about the hour-long speech. What are the issues that he touched on most that resonate with your constituents?
Well, Las Vegas and Southern Nevada were so hard hit by COVID, and we had unemployment about 35%. Now that's down to about 4.5%. So we are the fastest recovering, even though the hardest hit. So that's what people care about. They want to be sure that that recovery is sustained and that it reaches all people in the community. And I think he made that very clear. He was the president for all people, and he wanted the benefits, whether it's education or streets or jobs, to reach all communities.
President Biden also touched on a top issue facing Americans last night, and that is immigration. He blamed his predecessor as well as Republicans for tanking that bipartisan border bill. He also invoked Laken Riley, who was that Georgia college student who was murdered allegedly by a migrant who was here illegally in Georgia. And he said this, quote, "An innocent young woman who was killed by an illegal." Some Democrats have taken to social media criticizing President Biden over his wording there, calling a migrant an illegal, and the National Immigration Law Center posted that the president, quote, parroted dehumanizing Republican rhetoric about migrants. Do you take issue with President Biden using that term, calling a migrant an illegal?
Well, we don't use that term. I mean, we have a number of migrants in my district from Central America, Mexico, El Salvador in particular, and we always are careful to say without papers or undocumented. I think that would have been perhaps a better choice of words.
He also touched on the conflict in the Middle East, and while he was specifically talking about what the U.S. is doing to provide humanitarian aid to Gaza, a few of your colleagues, Congresswoman Tlaib and Bush, held up signs that said, quote, lasting ceasefire now. And then Democrat Congresswoman Ilhan Omar was holding a sign that said, stop sending bombs, while President Biden was speaking about the Israel-Hamas war. What's your reaction to that?
Well, the president is a supporter of Israel, as am I, and as a majority of the people in the country, as well as in the Congress. So we have to recognize Israel's right to defend itself, and we have to recognize Hamas as a terrorist organization that perpetrated an awful, awful thing last October. But by the same token, we have to show a leadership role when it comes to recognizing the rules of war, and that means taking care of innocent people and providing humanitarian aid. And he was trying to emphasize that we'd like a ceasefire for a certain amount of time to bring the hostages home, and we're going to now set up like hospital ships or a floating dock to be able to deliver more of that humanitarian aid. And I think he struck the right balance.
But how do you feel specifically about some of your colleagues on the Democratic side seemingly protesting his Israel policy at the State of the Union by holding those signs?
Well, they have to answer to their own constituents. I don't think it's appropriate. I didn't do that, but they are playing to their own, either their background, their feelings, or their constituents. And so I'm a strong believer in the First Amendment, and if they thought that was appropriate, then that was their choice.
Going into the night and over the past few months, as you know, President Biden's age has been a concern, and he addressed it a few times in his speech last night. I'll read some of those times. He said, quote, "I was born amid World War II when America stood for freedom in the world. And, quote, in my career, I've been told I was too young, and I've been told I'm too old. Whether young or old, I've always known what endures. And, quote, when you get to be my age, certain things become clearer than ever." How do you think President Biden handled this age concern? Because for a while, it's really been the elephant in the room.
Well, that's true that people have focused on age because they haven't been able to criticize some of the policies that have turned this country around. I liked his line where he said we turned a setback into a comeback. So you focus on something superficial. I was really glad that he addressed it, though, and he did it in a sincere way and even kind of a joking way at times. And it's not about the age, it's about what you've done with those years and the experience you have, the knowledge you've acquired, the compassion that you feel having experienced those things. And I think he laid that out, and we'll have put it to rest, because that was a strong speech. He didn't call his wife by the wrong name. He knew what he was talking about, and he delivered it quite effectively.
Recently, this is now before the State of the Union speech. According to a HarrisX Forbes poll, 69% of voters think Biden is showing his age, showing he's too old. Do you think this speech quelled those concerns?
I think so. He knows the material. He delivered it strongly. He showed compassion for the American people. I think people know he's able to return as president and continue to do a good job.
Republicans were trying to draw a contrast in the ages of President Biden and the senator delivering the GOP response, Alabama Senator Katie Britt. House Speaker Mike Johnson said this in a statement before Thursday's response, quote, "The American people will tune in as the youngest Republican woman ever elected to the Senate turns the page on the oldest president in history." And during her response, Britt called Biden a, quote, "dithering and diminished leader." What do you think of this contrast, and overall, what did you think of her response?
Well, they certainly set it up their way to try to show a contrast. But, do you really think that's effective to refer to the president as dithering? I thought she looked like a soap opera star, frankly, whispering into the camera with all the dramatics, the crocodile tears. So I don't believe she was very effective.
So, Congresswoman, before I let you go, I would like to know, in one word, what do you think the state of our union is now?
I think it's strong. I'm a teacher. If I were to give the president a grade, it would be an incomplete, because we've done a lot, but we have some more to do.
Give the president an incomplete. And what would you then grade the Republican response?
Well, I'd give that an F. I thought that was pretty hopeless. But, when the president set up the contrast, he did a good job of bragging about and laying out all our accomplishments. Democrats aren't very good at doing that, but the speech was effective. All the investment in infrastructure, renewable energy, job creation, health care, and now let's build on that and make it even better for the next 4 years.
You did mention that President Biden did draw that contrast between himself and his predecessor, former President Donald Trump. A conservative commentator, though, did say, Scott Jennings, quote, "he was obsessed with his political rival more than he was obsessed with the condition of the American people." Do you see any truth to that?
No, he never referred to him by name, I don't think. And he was not talking to the people in that room. He was talking to the American television audience. You know, you could tell the compassion that he had in his heart. And when he was laying out plans for expansion of education, expansion of coverage for drugs, what we were going to do in Ukraine, those are all forward looking. Those are all things that he stands for and that the Democratic Congress has supported him on. That didn't have anything to do with the failures of Donald Trump.
Congresswoman Dina Titus, thank you so much for joining me once again. You are welcome back anytime.
Thank you.